Hello everyone, my name is Sofia Barrow. This is my first time doing a live session, so please bear with me. I'm super excited. I'm a diversity and inclusion specialist, and yeah, I'm so excited to be listening to all of your questions. I'm going to be waiting a bit to see who's joining us, and yeah, I'm super excited to hear all your questions. Hello. I'm so excited, starting to get people join. Super great. So as I mentioned, I'm a diversity and inclusion specialist. I focus on mostly science, focusing towards STEM and science. So yeah, I graduated with a physics degree, but I decided to focus my career more towards the diversity and inclusion area, getting different minority groups and getting different persons to get involved in science. I believe that science not just for certain people, and unfortunately science, there has been a lot of work done in science, but it has only certain groups have been represented in science. So I have been working towards getting more people getting represented and how to make science more inclusive and more accessible. So hello. Also, I have a parrot, so I apologize if you hear a loud bird talk. That's totally my parrot. I really apologize about that. He's a little bit loud, so he's really cute and really funny. But yeah. In terms of the work that I do, so I started working about 3 years ago for Dr. Imogen Coe, who is the founding dean of the Faculty of Science at Ryerson University here in Toronto. And she is the thought leader of diversity and inclusion in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math here in Canada in terms of diversity and inclusion. She's fantastic. And I got the great privilege of starting working for her about 3 years ago and got to learn a lot from her. And after I started working for her, I kind of started realizing that I had a very strong passion towards advancing inclusion and diversity in science. So right now, I'm currently working towards my designation as a Canadian Certified Inclusion Practitioner. It's kind of a long process. And they only hold the tests about twice a year. So it's taking a little bit long. I'm writing my test in October, but I just finished my Leadership and Inclusion certificate, so I have a very multidisciplinary background. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, I focus a lot of the work not only on the 4 designated groups in Canada, which are oh, sorry, I'm like seeing someone's interested to know who I am. I am Sofia Barrow. My discussion is on how to advance diversity and inclusion in science, how to make science more inclusive, how to make sure that science is equitable. And yeah, I'm from Toronto, Ontario. I graduated with a medical physics degree, and I just finished my Leadership and Inclusion certificate. So yeah, that's pretty much what I focus on. And what I was saying is pretty much how I got involved in working in this area, from working with Dr. Imogen Coe. Hello, everyone. So from working with Dr. Imogen Coe, who is the leader in diversity and inclusion here in Canada, one of the main ideas that she brought to Canada was the idea of bringing Athena Swan, which is it's a program that it's run in the UK, and they have it also right now. The US and Australia had adopted this program as well, and Canada just started the work last year on adopting this program as well, which promotes getting the different designated groups to be more represented in academia. So a lot of good work is happening there if you research more about it. The government of Canada supporting that, which is really great. But I focus my work more towards strategy and making sure that science and science organizations are have a good diversity and inclusion strategy that can go from your communication strategy to the actual human resources strategy to all the different type of strategies that a person can have. Like, it's as simple as making sure your website is accessible to how you're going to be managing issues of sexual harassment in your workplace. So it's a very, very large spectrum. And I focus a lot on that. Right now, one of the work that Dr. Imogen Coe and I have been doing is in how to make conferences more accessible. So scientific conferences, unfortunately, are not very accessible many times for persons with disabilities, for the different gender identities. Unfortunately, we keep hearing stories of horrible harassment and stories of harassment and sexual harassment in conferences. So we're trying to build how to make conferences more accessible here in Canada, and so far it's going really, really great. We are very likely going to have a paper coming out soon about that, and hopefully more organizations start taking on that, because unfortunately, we're still a little bit behind on how to make sure that everyone's inclusive. And by inclusivity, I mean, so inclusivity is bringing everyone to the table, making sure that everyone feels safe and wants to be here on the table and wants to participate equally. Not equally, equitably. So part of the groups that Canada represents as the designated groups, what we call them, are persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, women, and visible minorities. But we also, part of my work is also representing the LGBT community, because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of education, to make sure that people understand gender identities, that people understand how to be better allies. So that's part of the work that I do, and science is still a little bit behind in that sense. The scientific community is still a little bit behind in that sense, so it's a lot of education that we have to do. And that's pretty much part of what I do in this sense. Hello to the Addictive photographer. Oh, this is really cool. I'm a photographer too. So yeah. It's a lot of work that we have to do, and I believe that in terms for us to foster inclusion in everywhere, it needs to be individual work. We all have to work towards it, and we all have to work in the way that works for us. Because one of the big things that I have kind of been finding is a lot of shaming people who do not understand inclusion and people who do not understand diversity. And what we have to understand is that it's a very complex concept. It's three different very complex concepts. Equity, diversity, inclusion, the three of them are very different. The idea is to use the three of them together. Hello, Flying Six. The idea is to get the three of them together in order to make sure, what I believe is to make sure that we deliver an inclusive work environment. We usually say that we want equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I really believe that it's the other way around. We want inclusion to deliver diversity and equity. Why? Because an inclusive work environment or an inclusive scientific environment is going to make sure that everyone wants to be part of it, that everyone feels included, that everyone feels valued. Sorry, I have people asking, what's this live about? So I'm just going to say, talking about how to make science more inclusive and how to make sure that we deliver diversity and inclusion in terms of scientific work environments. So I'm a diversity and inclusion specialist. And what I was mentioning is that we want to make sure that we have inclusive work environments and work environments where everyone gets to perform equally, because what that's going to do, that's going to bring equity into the workplace. That's going to bring diversity. If we have inclusive work environments, we're going to attract diversity. We're going to attract diverse people, and we're going to attract diverse perspectives. And that's pretty much what we want. And the end of the goal, our end goal is to make sure that we have diversity of thought. Why? Because in terms of science, everyone wants diversity. If we have diverse environments, we're going to be able to get more different perspectives, and it's going to be significantly easier for us to get more scientific advancements and more innovation. Different thoughts are going to bring different perspectives, and that's what's going to advance innovation in the future. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And yeah. Hello. Oh, I see some familiar names. Hello, Farah. So yeah, in terms of what are different things that we can do to advance inclusion in science, as young scientists, the first thing that I would recommend to everyone to do is make sure that you have, as young science communicators, is learn more about how you can make your science communication inclusive. If you're in Ontario, I would recommend you read the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians Act, because it has a whole bunch of great resources and great how-tos in terms of make your science communication more inclusive. I would focus a lot on the communication part of it. So focus on like how to make your website inclusive, how to make handouts inclusive, how to make presentations inclusive, because that's one big thing that we're realizing, that in terms of inclusion, people are not being very inclusive in presentations. People are not being very inclusive in their different websites, in their poster presentations are sadly not very inclusive. So we need to work a little bit more on that to make sure that every single person is represented and every single person gets the opportunity. Sorry about that. Apparently I had really bad Wi-Fi. I'm back. So yeah, it's those little comments that we make that can affect people and can isolate or alienate people. So we have to make sure that we work on our implicit biases and our microaggressions to make sure that those do not affect people. Because okay, I'm like moving my phone because apparently I have poor connection. Because the problem with implicit biases and microaggressions is that people who get those implicit biases and microaggressions on a regular basis, they can become part of what we call stereotype threat, which is that fear of being seen under the lens of a stereotype, and that tends to affect performance. So if someone's telling you that like you don't look like you're from here, that you don't talk like you're from here, like someone tells you that they keep telling you and making like little comments that you do not belong, people start believing that, and people start feeling that fear of not belonging, and that tends to affect how people perform, right? And unfortunately in sciences, we do not want that, because science is about discoveries and finding things out. So if we're not allowing people to be themselves and bring their entire selves to the workplace or to the lab or to the classroom, we're not allowing them perform at their maximum. And in sciences, we do not want that. We want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in order to be able to do their best when they're doing their research or they're learning, or they're in committees. Like, we want to make sure that people feel welcome and they feel included at the entirety of time. So that's a lot of the work I do. I do a lot of training, both for staff, students. I give a lot of talks in this type of topics, because even though like they're kind of very simple topics, it kind of people forget about it. And I believe that in terms of microaggressions and implicit biases training, we have to do it on an ongoing basis, because you forget right away. Like, you can do an implicit bias training and within 3 days you forget about it. So we have to kind of like make sure that we're like working on it on a regular basis in order for it to kind of like encode in our brains, and like make sure that we're working against our biases on a regular basis. And sorry, I've been having like Wi-Fi problems for some reason. Internet problems, not Wi-Fi, internet problems, connection. So hopefully it stays good now. But yeah, part of like what we want to do is make sure that we are inclusive, and that we're making sure that we're allowing everyone to bring themselves to the workplace at the entirety of time. So yeah, that's one of the main things that we want in terms of diversity and inclusion. Make sure that we start working against those biases. And this is just like a very simple thing that we can all work towards, like making sure that we're managing our biases, and that it's an ongoing process, and that we keep working towards it. And we can kind of like, it's like self-actualization, right? Like, we're kind of like refreshing ourselves in terms of like implicit biases, and that we are just very, very aware of them at the entire time. So if anyone wants to share anything in terms of diversity inclusion, or like things that had happened in like your workplace or your lab or school, anything, I would be super, super interested to like hear if anyone has experienced any sort of... Okay, there we go. Seem to be having a lot of issues with my Wi-Fi, so hopefully this stays well. A lot of issues with my connection. I'm so sorry. So yeah, we were talking about diversity and inclusion in science, how to make science more inclusive. Sorry about that. So yeah, part of how I got into this area, it's mostly because I moved to Canada about 8-9 years ago. I came from Mexico. So yeah, I like realized that there were a whole bunch of here, like in Mexico, people, there's a bigger scientific community now. There's a bigger scientific community now. The before, but now it's getting bigger and bigger. But back when I moved here from Mexico, the scientific community was not that great, and it's not that great in terms of not that big. Not really. I know. I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, my connection's not really. Can you hear me now? Is this better? I hope this is better. So yeah, in terms of, I moved from Mexico 8 years ago, and kind of being a scientist was not really a thing. I was considering going to medicine. In Mexico, you can go into medicine. And then I moved to Canada, and being a scientist was a possibility, and I was very, very excited about it. And one of the... Okay, I moved in my own apartment, so hopefully this is better. Yeah, one of the main things that I realized was that as I started doing science, I started getting like comments from people telling me that I like did not look like a scientist. I got like a random person send me a message on Instagram telling me that sending me a whole like long paragraph telling me that I did not look like a physicist, and that I hope that I was actually a physicist, because otherwise it would be very disappointing that I like... it was just like a whole bunch of like stuff on like my gender and how like I did not look like a physicist according to them. And then that was very discouraging. And then I got married to a scientist as well, and I started realizing that a lot of people were very interested in him as a scientist, but people were not really like interested in me, my career overall. Two, very surprised whenever I would say that I was a scientist. So that was a little bit discouraging, and I started to realize that there was this idea of like, one, women are not really in science, two, minorities are not really in science. So that was it was kind of like a wake-up call for me, like realizing that I believe I have a lot of privilege. I am very aware of my privilege, and if I, who has like all this privilege, is like feeling like I don't belong in science, like what's happening with all the other underrepresented groups in science? So yeah, when I started kind of like working a little bit more and more about this, I realized that there was like a huge problem in terms of representation in science. So yeah, I was just kind of like opening this Pandora box of like everything that's happening, and like all the people that are being like underrepresented, and all the people that do not feel like they belong, and all like the like different harassment stories that I've been hearing, or all the like different like lack of accessibility, like conferences that do not that are not accessible for persons with disabilities, or for women with children, or like for even like socioeconomical, right? Like the lack of like inclusion in terms of being able to like get funding to go to a conference and things like that. So I kind of like, it was like that, this Pandora box that was opened, and I felt like there was like so much to be done in this area. So yeah, I started focusing a lot on it. I started doing a lot of work and research. There's a lot of education. It's been like 3 years of like work on this, and yeah, I realized that like I wanted to give my career towards this, and like there's a lot of work to be done. There is unfortunately not much funding to support this, but it's getting better. It's getting a little bit better. Hello, everyone. So yeah, in terms of diversity and inclusion, I realized that like I had like all this privilege, and at the same time I kind of like had my like own experience to share. So it was a good kind of like win-win situation. Like I, as a member of a minority group, it was kind of good to like get more involved in diversity and inclusion. Some of the challenges that I found in terms of diversity and inclusion is there's definitely what we call diversity fatigue. So whenever you're kind of like training people and talking to people about how to make things more inclusive and everything, there's a lot of resistance, or sometimes there's a lot of people who think they get it, but don't really get it. And that can be very discouraging sometimes, like especially whenever like you give a talk or a training and you get people challenging you on what you're talking to them about, like in terms of inclusion or in terms of like specifically like actually microaggressions. I found is one of the hardest things to teach people, because people don't realize that we all have biases and that we all showcase our biases in different ways. So people tend to get a little defensive in that sense, and in those cases, when you're experiencing that every day, you kind of like are working on it, we tend to get what we call diversity fatigue. Like you get tired of it, you get a little bit discouraged about it. So I found that that was one of the most challenging things that to deal with in terms of diversity and inclusion work. But at the same time, it's very rewarding, because like you get a lot of people who like working towards getting everyone into the table. Like it's so rewarding. Like you definitely like know that Dr. Imogen Ko has a quote. I can't remember who said this quote, but it's like, if the cure of cancer it's in a woman in an underrepresented country, we're never going to find it. So we need to do that work to make sure that everyone who wants to do science gets to do science. Another very challenging thing that I found in terms of diversity and inclusion work is a lot of people who call themselves, even though they don't know, experts in the area. That can be very problematic, because right now one of the things is that like what I kind of like realize is that when we're doing diversity and inclusion work, especially like from a strategy perspective, there's a lot of people who kind of water down the diversity and inclusion issues. And that could be problematic, because then organizations start, like especially larger organizations, start seeing that as their diversity and inclusion way of being more inclusive. And if you're like, for example, I'm trying to work with like strategy from like a policy perspective, and then you have like a huge organization who believes that by holding a Women in Science event, they're being inclusive. And one event's not going to change anything, realistically speaking, other than just how they look. So in those senses, whenever we have like people, and sometimes it's even like young scientists who kind of like call themselves experts in this area, it can actually affect. I believe that everyone should participate and everyone should try to be more inclusive and everything, but people should not be giving expert opinions if they are not experts. I did a degree in physics, but I tend to not give expert opinions in physics because I only have a bachelor's, and like I'm not like, there are people with PhDs who are significantly more like have more expertise than I do. So the same thing goes for diversity and inclusion. Like we really have to like give the place to the experts to be the experts. And if you're passionate about something, go for it. If you want to learn more about it, go for it. That's fantastic. But we should not allow people who are not experts call themselves experts. Like that's just kind of like basic science 101, I think. What else in terms of diversity and inclusion? There's a lot of work to be done. If any of you know how to get funding for diversity and inclusion, let me know, because I would love to get like more money from both the government organizations and everyone to like get involved. If any of you are like interested in to bring in more inclusive practices into your lab or your workplace, like contact me. My name is Sofia Barrow. You can find me on Instagram as Sofia.thephysicist. My connection is really, really bad, and I just realized that it depends on which way I point my iPhone towards, so I apologize about that. But yeah, like in terms of inclusion, if you're interested in getting like, or just yourself, like if you want to brand yourself and like make sure that your branding's a little bit more inclusive, let me know, because I can help you with that. Just from like as simple as like Instagram and Twitter, you can make it so much more inclusive. Like there's so much work we can do in that sense. I really believe that Instagram should add closed captioning into live videos, because that would be so fantastic. So yeah, there's a lot of work that we can do in that sense. So yep, if you're interested in being more involved in terms of diversity and inclusion, let me know, because there's a lot to do in this area. Anyone else has any questions, any ideas? I would love to hear ideas. I would love to hear your experiences. No? Maybe? So for all of those new ones who have just joined, my name is Sofia Barrow. I am a diversity and inclusion specialist focused towards science, STEM. So yeah, I focus towards making diversity and inclusion more accessible. Science more accessible, because I believe that inclusion delivers diversity and equity. So, another like good thing for everyone to know, it's the difference between equity and equality. Could I explain? Yes, absolutely. Explain how to make science more accessible, or what I focus on. I will explain how to make science, what I do. So I focus a lot on bringing both training strategy towards diversity and inclusion in scientific workplace. So that goes from conferences to how to make labs more inclusive, how to make workplaces more inclusive, how to make sure that everyone's represented in the workplace. That can go from recruitment to retention to outreach to policies. So in terms of policies, you go from you have to understand the key, in terms of when you're trying to do policies, you have to understand the key legislative areas in your area. So for example, here in Ontario, you have to know, in terms of diversity and inclusion, you have to know your Health and Safety Act, because sexual harassment and harassment are actually part of the Health and Safety Act. You have to know your human rights, so the Ontario and the Canadian human rights. Here in Ontario, we have to know AODA, so the Accessibility for Ontarians. So what is diversity and inclusion? Diversity is the same way in biology, it's the difference, the everyone involved. Diversity means how people are different, how people are, how we are, have different things, different traits, different, where we're that can go from where you're coming from to how you look, towards your educational background, your religious background, your different abilities, both physically, mentally, any sort of abilities, your way of thinking, your language. Diversity goes from pretty much how we're all different. Now, we're all different. That's when inclusion comes in place. Especially in places such as Toronto, that is so diverse. We have people from all over the world. We have people with all different abilities. We have people all different gender identities. The key thing with inclusion is how we're going to bring everyone into the table. So inclusion means kind of bringing everyone together. How we make sure that everyone feels like they belong. How do we make sure that everyone's part of the conversation? How do we make sure that everyone is welcomed? And that's the part where equity comes into place. So equity is very different from equality. Equality means equalness, means having everyone has the same. Everyone has the same things, everyone gets the same opportunities, everyone has the same rights, everyone's treated the same. That's equality. In terms of equity, equity is making sure that equity means fairness. Sorry, I'm back here. Equity means fairness. So equity means bringing everyone into the table, but having not the same opportunity, but the same things that will give them the same end result. So for example, this is it's a very, very common example that you're going to hear all the time. That it's the whole, let's imagine that you're running a marathon, and you're going to have like a whole bunch of people like running the marathon, but you're going to give everyone the same pair of shoes. So like all of them are going to get the same pair of shoes, and regardless of their size or their like type of feet or anything, you're going to give them all a size 8. So that's what equality means. Everyone gets the same to do the exact same thing. Equity is you're going to do the exact same race. Everyone's going to be different size, different type of feet, different everything. You're going to provide them the shoes that fit their feet. There you go. My ESL-ness is kind of taking over. So equity means that we're going to give that fair opportunity to everyone to perform equally as well. So that's what we want. We want equity because everyone's different, but not everyone needs the exact same thing to succeed. We all need different things to succeed. So in terms of equity, is giving the things that are targeted for every person to succeed. For example, a person with a disability might not have the same needs as a person who is just English as a second language, or an indigenous person in order to succeed might not need the same thing as a white woman, for example. So equity, it's targeting and making sure that everyone who's in the table has the things that work for them in order for them to succeed, to be part of the conversation. So that's kind of why it's so important, because when you have a diverse environment, you have to make sure that everyone is there, everyone feels included, and everyone has the tools to succeed in order to be able to be part of the conversation. So I hope that answers the question in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion and what they are. And part of why it's important in science is because in science, at the end of the day, the idea is that we get more discoveries and we advance innovation. So the only way that we're going to be able to get that is by having different thoughts. If you have people with the exact same ideas, you're kind of not going to move forward. And the best way that we can move forward is by getting different ideas in different ways of solve problems or different ways to answer things. So that's why it's important to have diverse perspectives. So yeah, I hope that helps. And then, yes, that's kind of like the main thing in terms of diversity and inclusion. We're all diverse. I believe that we're absolutely all diverse. We're all different, and people like to be treated differently. We don't like to be treated all exactly the same. We all like to be respected for our differences. And yeah. Oh, I just got a question. Do you think code of conduct for conferences are effective? Do I think the code of conduct for conferences are effective? That's a very, very good question. Yes and no. So it all depends. Having a code of conduct can be completely useless or can be absolutely fantastic. The difference is how you're going to enforce that code of conduct and what that code of conduct entails. So having a code of conduct, it's great if you're actually going to enforce it. I have seen so many times that there's code of conduct in conferences or programs, and then when something actually happens, when someone actually has a concern or has been dealing with some sort of harassment issues or some sort of mostly harassment or sexual harassment issues, the place doesn't really do anything about it, and in those cases a code of conduct would be useless. It really depends on how you enforce it. So if you enforce a code of conduct, I think it's actually fantastic. I absolutely love that. I believe that there should be code of conducts for pretty much everything. We just have to be better citizens. It saddens me that we have to remind people that they have to be behave well in conferences. But it's necessary. Like, it is necessary because like things have been happening, and people, like, it's part of being like educating, right? And while people are being educated, we educate people on diversity and inclusion issues, we're going to have to make sure that in the meantime we have kind of policies in place in order to avoid issues of harassment or avoid issues of like microaggressions. So I believe code of conducts in conferences can be very effective if they're well managed and if they're actually enforced correctly. Another thing is that I believe that in conferences, if you are going to have a code of conduct, you have to make sure that you promote it everywhere. So that goes from putting it on your website to making sure that you send emails to the people with it, written content, make sure that you put it in your program, like make sure you read it multiple times, like have to keep reminding people about it because people forget and people don't fully understand sometimes what it means. So if you're going to have a code of conduct, be very, very explicit with everything, every single thing means. So in terms of harassment or microaggressions or not being accessible, right? Like explicitly explain what everything means, because many times people read things and they kind of like don't realize that it can affect them. So I would strongly suggest, like, if you're going to have a conference and a code of conduct in the conference, make sure you're very, very explicit with it. And if you need help with it, like, just let me know. Like, I have helped with different codes of conduct. So and if you need help with enforcing it, I would suggest, in terms of enforcing conferences, codes of conduct in conferences, you have to have unbiased people kind of working towards it. So what I mean is, like, you have to have kind of an open door policy for people if they have a concern or if they have a issue that they need to, like, bring forward. You need to make sure that you have open door policies for people to actually feel safe by bringing their issues forward, and you need to have like a process of how you're gonna like move forward after, like, if someone, like in the terms of code of conduct, if someone is bringing a harassment complaint forward or an issue forward, like, what are you going to do with that? What are going to be the steps that you're going to do in order to make sure that it doesn't affect people and that both parties are dealt well with it, right? Because, like, sometimes you're, like, unfortunately, and this really saddens me, like, some people, like, bring forward issues that are not fully real or are kind of, like, brought out of proportion, right? So how are you going to deal with all of those things? Or sometimes they're going to bring issues that are, like, very, very significant, and, like, maybe it's better to pass liability to someone else. So how are you going to deal with that? And, like, many times it's really hard to kind of, like, manage that. So that's part of, like, where diversity and inclusion specialists like me come into place, because we know how to, like, who's the right person that you should be passing liability on if you have to, or who are you going to be, who's going to make sure that they enforce this, and making sure that we're not putting extra pressure on the scientists or, like, the conference organizers. Like, you kind of need someone unbiased and outside to help with that. And especially, like, if you have a conference that is, like, 2 or 3 days or, like, 1 day, like, what are you going to do, right? Like, are you going to, like, send them home? Are you going to keep them here? Like, are you going to separate people? How are you going to make sure that people are being, like, separated? How are you going to make sure that those accessibility requests are kind of, like, because it's if you want to call it an accessibility request or, like, so how are you going to make sure that everything like that happens? So it's like putting a code of conduct in a conference involves a lot of work, but I believe that they can be super effective if they're managed correctly. If not, it's just like a blurb in a pamphlet, like in a program. So sadly, like, I've seen codes of conduct in conferences that are just kind of, excuse my language, but, well, not excuse my language, but they're kind of, like, useless, like, just a blurb in a program, and that's just sad. So if you're gonna add a code of conduct in a conference, like, make sure that it's enforced properly. And if you see one in a conference and you see that it's kind of not clear how they're gonna, like, manage, like, the situations or how they're gonna, like, do it, call them out on it. Like, I would honestly, like, just, like, there should be a person in contact at the end of the code of conduct who's like, if you have any questions or concerns, like, contact whoever, ask them how they're managing it, because, like, we need to kind of start raising those flags on people to, like, realize that, like, hey, like, you have a code of conduct, but like, it shouldn't just be like a blurb to like checkbox, like, oh, I'm being inclusive. Make sure that like they're actually being held accountable for it. So that would be my advice. But no, great question. Thank you so much for sharing that, Science Linda. Any other questions in terms of codes of conduct in conferences, or how to make conferences more inclusive? Oh, no problem. Yeah, right now I'm actually, like, as I mentioned, I'm writing a paper on how to make conferences more inclusive, and that's part of like what I have in it. So once it's done, hopefully it will be posted in this site and you'll get to read more about it. But yeah, when it comes to like accessibility in the sciences, in conferences, that's actually one of like the like biggest issues. Like, I have realized that conferences is kind of, it's a tough thing because conferences tend to be very short. So sometimes it's easier for people to kind of like just like ignore that like diversity needs to be part of conferences too, and inclusion needs to be part of conferences. So yeah, no, good question. Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm probably gonna start saying goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for like joining me. It's been really, really fun. I think I've been talking a lot, so hopefully this is a little helpful. In terms of getting, if you have any more questions, let's talk about science. Are you a biologist? Definitely not. I am a physicist. I am a medical physicist. Well, I did my research in medical physics, proton therapy to be exact. But then after I finished, I realized I wanted to focus more towards science policy in terms of diversity and inclusion. So that's what I do mostly. Yep, as soon as I move my phone, my internet connection drops. Sorry about that. So yeah, no, I'm a medical physicist, but I focus my work towards diversity and inclusion, focus it towards science just because I have experience working with scientists and I've saw kind of a very significant lack of knowledge in diversity and inclusion in this area. So that's pretty much what I do. Yeah. I got another question. How did you switch from pure sciences to including diversity? It was actually not a switch. It was more kind of a very, very good transition. Oh, I killed the question. Sorry. It was just a really smooth transition actually. I went from, when I was doing my undergrad, I was the president of the Science Society at Ryerson, the first president of the Science Society at Ryerson. My faculty was very new. We separated from the Faculty of Engineering the year that I started my degree, so we became the Faculty of Science. And I was, I wanted to be an astronaut at some point in my life, but I'm very blind, so I cannot be an astronaut. And I wanted to bring an astronaut to Ryerson. And I told the Dean of the Faculty of Science that I brought Roberta Bondar, Dr. Roberta Bondar, who's fantastic, the first Canadian female astronaut. And she agreed to come, but it was 3 weeks after the date she agreed. So I had to plan this whole event in 3 weeks. And I did it. And after that, kind of showed my event planning and work at Ryerson. I started working with the Dean of the Faculty, Dr. Imogen Coe, who's the diversity and inclusion, the lead for diversity and inclusion nationally here in Canada. She's fantastic, has done great work in diversity and inclusion in science here in Canada. So I started working with her and I started realizing that I had a very, very strong passion towards it. So that was in my last year of undergrad that I started working with her, and I continue to work with her ever since. So it's been over 3 years now, I think. So yeah, after that, I finished my degree and I realized I kind of wanted to focus more on that area. I've been a whole bunch of conferences, policy conferences. This is Canadian Science Policy Conference. I have spoken there. I have organized panels there. And yeah, I realized that was pretty much what I wanted to do. So yeah, I still get to work with scientists, which I love. But I realized that my passion for diversity and inclusion was a little greater than my passion for physics. But I love physics. Physics is my babe. Okay, next question. How did you build rapport with professors and people in your field to let them include you in their, I hope, conversation? I don't know what it said at the end, but yeah. So I love talking, and I went and introduced myself to everyone on my first day of school. I literally went to introduce to the dean of the faculty on my first day of school, which many people did not really do that apparently. So yeah, I would honestly be like, don't be afraid of getting involved. And pretty much what happened after that is I kind of chose to not have the fear of introducing myself to people, and people start remembering you. If you introduce yourself 3 times, by the 4th one, they will know who you are. And then after that, I kind of started just being around. I started participating a lot in events. I started kind of, as you learn more and more about a specific topic, it's easier for you to ask questions and be involved. So that kind of really, really helped. And then after that, I helped Dr. Imogen Co. coordinate the first national symposium on equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM at the Canadian Science Policy Conference in 2016. So I believe that was kind of my first time that I got my name out there. Excuse me. And then after that, we coordinated 3 symposiums in that conference in 3 years. Last year was the last year that we did it. And one time we got invited by CBC on an interview about making science more inclusive, and I got invited along her. So I feel that was also very, very helpful to kind of help me get my name out there and get people in to hear me. So science communication really helps in that sense. Be very involved and learn as much as you can in the field, because that's definitely going to be helpful. I hope that helps. I'm a total introvert. I major in physics, but how can I build that relationship with a professor? Honestly, I totally understand the whole being an introvert. It's very hard to kind of put ourselves out there. Honestly, I'm not sure if you're starting your degree soon or if you have started your degree already, but one of my chemistry teachers told me in high school was try to sit towards the front, because if you're in a class of 1,000 people or 300 people, your professor's very likely going to remember more the ones that are at the front. Ask questions, and professors are going to have office hours, and they're going to have different times to kind of be around them. If there's events, go to the events at your university. Try to socialize in a professional way, if that makes sense. Because the more you show up on the radar, the more they're gonna remember you. I realized that was very, very helpful. So if they have seminars during break times, or if they have any sort of hackathons or anything like that, get involved. Honestly, what I believe is in someone's degree, 50%, everyone goes to a university to get a degree. Absolutely everyone's going to get the same same out of the university experience. But I feel getting a degree is about 60% of the experience that you should be getting out of university. The other 40% is going to be up to you to earn in different ways. So that goes from being in a research lab, doing research, working with university committees, working with societies, working it's going to be up to you how you want to build your other 40%. So that's going to be very helpful. So yeah, I would honestly just work on getting around your professors. So next question, what area of science do you think have less diversity and inclusion? In terms of data, I believe it's computer science, and then followed by that, I think physics and then mathematics, or mathematics and then physics. It's around that. Those are the areas that are a little bit less inclusive in terms of binary gender diversity. So I mean, like, the two gender identities that people commonly know, which is women and men. I believe computer science, physics, and mathematics are the ones that are a little bit more behind. And yeah, I got a lot, like, I was lucky because medical physics, it's still, there's a lot of biology involved, and my faculty was actually really good about getting being a little more diverse. Like, we were, in terms of binary gender diversity, we were pretty equitable. But yeah, I did not see persons with disability represented or indigenous people represented. So yeah. The next question: how did you introduce yourself to the dean on the first day? This is hilarious, but I literally remember it was orientation day. And I don't know where the heck I got my courage to do this. She, the dean, went and gave her whole talk, introduced herself in front of the entire first year class. And then at the end, I saw a whole lineup of professors kind of all chatting with each other, and I did not no student was near them. They were kind of up there, amazing people that we all kind of looked for, up to. They had just introduced themselves and said all the amazing things that they do, and all of us are first years not knowing anything, and I didn't see any student nearby. So I got a good friend of mine, Yelena, I remember. I told her, let's go introduce ourselves to the dean. And she was like, no, I'm just I'm nervous and whatever. And I'm just what are they gonna do? If I go introduce myself to them, what are they're gonna say hi regardless. They're not gonna be rude, most likely. I hoped. And I went and I remember I went and introduced myself, and I'm just hey, I'm Anna Sofia. I am a first year student, starting first year here. I'm super, super excited about it. I mentioned that I was the president of the student council in high school, and I was president of student council in high school, and I want to be I think I said something along the lines of, you'll remember who I am. And I ended up working for her. So it worked. So yeah, find that courage and go introduce yourself to the dean. It actually helps. And they kind of it. I remember she mentioned at some point that I made quite an impression. So yeah, find that courage. Honestly, it's hard, but they're most likely going to be really nice about it. Yeah. So apparently I have a minute left, so if you have any last questions, I would love to answer them.